Thank you for inviting me to return. It's great to celebrate with you this, which is Palm Sunday, isn't it? This is when the church really begins to understand its purpose as we follow the life of Christ in his walk towards that cross. Not difficult to know what to preach about, is it? Very obvious. Good to see your faces again this morning. And I know the illness is surrounding you, and people are away, and Carolyn has returned safely, and my prayers for huge blizzards in Florida didn't happen. Close, was it? Close? I'm glad you've returned safely. We're glad to have you back. Some time ago, I was touring France, and one of the places I visited, or my group visited, was a place called the Veterans Hospital in Paris. I think it might have been called the Infirmary at the time. And we were all ushered in. You'd wonder why would we be invited to a veterans hospital. But as we came into the main floor, which was all polished marble, we looked down into a cavern in the middle of the floor. And there was a huge sarcophagus surrounded by black columns of black marble, adorned the capitals with the ornaments encrusted in gold. And there, imprinted on a rose-colored stone, was one word: Napoleon. We were visiting his burial site. I don't think I was allowed to take pictures, but I think I did. I think I've got it somewhere. Couldn't find it. And the tour guide, who was showing us around, said, "Ici, la gloire de France. Here lies the glory of France." But buried in that casket were the mortal dust and crumbling bones of someone who was just a memory. I want to take you to another tomb. I want you to look inside with me. And this tomb is not in Paris, France. It's in Jerusalem, at a place at the base of Calvary, called Gordon's Calvary. Look inside that tomb with me, and you'll see that it's empty. Don't you remember those words of the shining messengers who sat outside the gate of the tomb? They said, "He is not here. He is risen." And that's why we're here to worship today. Because that tomb is empty. And because he is risen. And here, as we worship, is the glory of the risen Christ. No ancient dust, no crumbling bones, no casket. Tomb is empty. Don't you remember this song? Death cannot keep his prey, Jesus my Savior. He tore the bars away, Jesus my Lord. Up from the grave he arose with a mighty triumph o'er his foes. And herein lies the keystone of your faith and mine, the faith of the Christian church. He arose triumphant over death. That's what the disciples echoed over the years. He is risen. There was an ancient custom, and I wish we would follow it. An ancient custom in the Eastern Church, whereby when they gathered at the monasteries or at the chapels, they greeted one another with, "He is risen." And the reply would come back, "He is risen indeed." just as he promised. That's the keystone of our faith. He is risen indeed, just as he promised. Each of the apostles took up that message. And in fact, the very man who was to replace the traitor Judas, his name was Matthias. He was voted in. They said that he was ordained that he might be a witness to the resurrection. That's the whole thrust of the apostles. That's the whole thrust of this church, that we talk about the resurrection. But you know, actually I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I talk about the empty tomb, maybe I need to talk about the empty cross. There was a jewelry store, there is a jewelry store in New York City. And a customer came in and the clerk said, "How may I help you?" And the customer said, "I'd like to see some fine, nice crosses." "Well," he said, "here, come right over here to this cabinet. Now I've got some very nice little crosses here." And he said, "There's this one and this one." "Oh, well, here's a little one. It's got a little man on it. I don't know who he is, but it's a nice cross." You know, he was mistaken on two counts, wasn't he? He didn't know who the little man was. And I want to tell you, I think from my thing, there are no nice crosses. Cross was an instrument of torture, horror, humiliation, even murder. There are no nice crosses. We don't wear crosses. Well, we wear them as decorative jewelry, but we don't wear them as little men on them, do we? Because the cross is empty. That's what we're celebrating, the empty cross, the empty tomb. I'd like to tell you, I think there's a better symbol that you and I could wear, that you and I could use. You know what I think it is? I think it's the towel and the basin. I think that would be an apt symbol for Christianity, because it shows somebody cares. Somebody described God with a towel in his hand. You use the towel for service. Vernon Gowns in 1973 was the president of Denver Conservative Baptist Theological Seminary. What a title. I couldn't remember it. Had to write it down. And he came to the class in 1973 and he said, "I want to give each one of you," this is a graduating class, "I want to give each one of you a little gift." And they said, "Now, wonder what that president will give us. Will he give us a little book, a little medallion, maybe a little scholarship?" Because he promised that whatever he gave them would help them throughout the rest of their lives. When it came time for them to receive their cap of their graduation, he didn't hand them a Bible. He didn't hand them a medallion. He didn't hand them any money. He handed them a little square, white square of terry cloth. He said, "This will help you for the rest of your lives." A little square of terry cloth? What good is that? One missionary, after a lifetime on the mission field, came home, and he pulled out his wallet, and he pulled out that little square of cloth that was almost worn to bits. And he said, "This has been the most valuable part of my ministry. I went and I was commissioned to go into the world that I might serve." Every time I got discouraged, every time I got troubled, every time I was defeated, I opened my wallet, took out that little piece of cloth, and it said, it reminded me that God sent me to serve. That's what God's doing for us here in Hillgrove today, sending us out to serve. I'm going to talk to you today from John chapter 13, if you want to follow along. And you'll find in verse 3, it says that Jesus, knowing that he was going back to God, rose from the supper table, laid aside his garments, took a towel, girded himself, poured water into the basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. There's my favorite symbol of Christianity, the towel and the basin. Here we are, not quite up to the Passover yet, are we? That's coming this week. The high priest would go out. He'd look for the first signs of the full moon. That was important to him. Then he would count ahead so many days, and he said this will be the time of the high and holy feast of the Passover. Every Jew was obliged, if he was in distance, to come to Jerusalem to worship at the temple at the time of the Passover. It's a very important day. If you couldn't bring your whole family, then you would assign the head of the household to come, to take your place, to remember the days that Jehovah had brought Israel out of slavery and into the abundance of God's blessing. They'll commemorate how that time of slavery, when they were in Egypt, that God said, if you will sprinkle blood of the sacrificial lamb upon the doorpost, the angel of death will pass over when he sees the blood. And every Jew had to commemorate that precious survival. Every faithful Jew had to head towards that temple. And he had to bring with him a lamb. Preferably a lamb from his own flock. Preferably a lamb that had spent a few days in their household. And that lamb had to be pure, spotless, without spot or wrinkle, I think the Bible says. In excellent shape. So the family or the head of the household would bring this perfect spotless lamb before the high priest. And the high priest would examine it for any defect, no blindness, no cripple, a fine, healthy animal. But the high priest would look at it and he said, no, this will not pass inspection. This one's got a blemish. You cannot bring it as a sacrifice. But wait. We priests have a flock for the temple. And they're perfect for your purposes. And we'll sell you one at a very good price for us. And the poor fellow had to have a sacrifice. He had to have the atonement of the blood. And he would be forced to pay. You know what the high priest would do for himself? He also had some diseased animals. He had some blemished animals. And that's what he would offer for his offering to God. Something that was weak and diseased and blind. He gave the least of what he had. He gave the leftovers of what he had. Isn't it strange that when you and I come to worship our God, and we swear that we will follow our God, our best, our devotion becomes merely an empty ritual, a routine that I go through day after day, Sunday after Sunday, without making it meaningful and honoring the God that I say that I will serve. God was very angry with this kind of sacrifice. Listen to him in Malachi chapter 1. God says, if I am your father and master, then where is the honor and where is the respect that I deserve? For you have shown nothing but contempt for my name. And the Israelites, pretending to be ignorant of it, whoa, they said, how have we held your name in contempt? God says, you have offered up defiled sacrifices on my altar. You may beg me to be merciful to you, and I will show you no favor at all. God was angry, and I don't blame him. How do I think that I can get away with offering God the least of my services? Where do I think it's going to please God if I give him my leftovers? The leftovers of my money, the leftovers of my time, the leftovers of my wishes, the leftovers of my love. If I don't offer him the perfect sacrifice, all of my will, all of my surrender, God will go on to say, You take the offering that you're bringing to me, the weak, the diseased, the lame, the blind, the affected and afflicted. Why don't you give that to your governor? Do I think if I brought my least of devotion, my least work habits, I brought them to my boss? What would happen if I gave you a gift and it was not the nicest gift I could afford? What if I gave you the worst gift I had? Would you be pleased? And yet I think I can get away with it with God. I can offer up to Him the least that I have got. Jesus, the perfect sacrificial lamb, was there at the Passover. Look around the room with me. Look around this upper room that has been reserved for the Master. Somebody's missing. Come on, count them. Look at the apostles. Well, I see Peter. There's John. James. Someone's missing. Who's missing in the upper room? You don't know, do you? You know why we don't know? Because we're not used to this. You know who's missing? The guy who washes your feet. Every host who was hospitable, every host provided a servant. When you came in the door with your sandals, your dusty, dirty feet, you've been walking through mud, maybe water, you've been walking maybe through goat dung, your feet were dirty. They smelled. And you did a kind service if you washed their feet and maybe put a little rose water in the water just to make your feet smell a little better. Every home, if you couldn't afford a servant, you did it yourself. They could have afforded a servant. Where was it? Somebody didn't provide the servant to come and wash the feet. No servant wanted to do it. You know, there was a hierarchy in the slave department as well. This slave served food. That slave made beds. No slave wanted to wash feet. Well, would you want to wash my feet? No. Do you want me to cut your toenails? No, I don't want to do it. Dirty job. It's not dignified. I'd lose my dignity if I had to do that. And Peter said, oh, Master. He saw his master going to get the basin of water. He saw his master going for the towel. He saw his master tying up his garb so that he could kneel and wash their feet. No, Master, you're not going to wash my feet. Don't you think Peter's being pretty humble here? Peter's got an ulterior motive. He's a clever man. And he knows very well that if Jesus is going to wash his feet, what's Peter got to do? He's got to wash the feet of everyone else around him. And Peter's saying, no, beneath me. I am the first apostle. Beneath my dignity. I'm not trimming your dirty toenails. To the very end, Jesus was always teaching his apostles. He wanted to teach them the way of service. That's the message that he's trying to teach us today here at Hillgrove in Second Road River. Trying to teach us the way of service. Do I think that the cross is a good symbol for service? No. It's a symbol for Christianity, but it's a symbol of humiliation. It's a symbolic gesture of murder. The most unjust death ever executed. I think a better symbol is that towel and the basin, showing that not only does God care for me, but that I care for you. When we know that we belong to God, when we know that our destiny is always going to be with Him, then I know that my calling, and I can accept my calling, will always be to give myself away in service. I can accept the fact that if I know ultimately my destiny is to be with God, that I ought to be able to give myself away and serve you, even if it means washing your dirty feet. Nothing else counts. Nothing else pleases with God, except that we abandon ourselves to Him by serving others, and thus serving Him. Can you get that into your system? It's not easy. Isn't one of us that want to give up our rights? Not one of us wants to wash someone else's feet. We have priorities. I deserve better than that. And the minute that I abandon my will to God's will, then I give myself up for opportunities that I can serve Him and I can serve you. Boy, what a motley crew. Look around that upper room. You see the strangest people. Well, there's Peter. We've already talked about Peter. I like to call him Peter the bulldozer. He just pushed his way through, didn't he? He told you what to do. He didn't say, this is what I'll do for you. But you know, there's somebody else there that we need to take a look at. And it's the very person that we least want to talk about. Judas. Look at him in verse 30. Judas, having received the piece of bread from the master, went out immediately, and it was night. Now that's an interesting statement. It was night. Not only gives us the time of day, but I think it goes much further. I think it talks about the state and condition of Judas's heart. It was black in his heart. It says, in fact, that Satan entered his heart. What a motley crew. From the strong, aggressive, mighty Peter to the weak, ineffective Judas. What a motley crew. Dare I say, what a motley crew we are here today. We're all different. Some of us are here because we want to serve other people. And we will continue to serve other people as long as I get my own way. Some of us are here who don't want to really wait on anybody else, but we love to be waited on. We love to be served. But you know, worst of all, there are some of us here today who would betray Jesus. Judas is not alone. I'm guilty of betrayal. I sometimes betray myself with my own moral standard or lack of them. I have betrayed my friend when they thought they could trust me. I have betrayed my God when I don't submit every portion of my life to Him. And I don't speak a word of witness. I don't speak up when I could. Darkness entered Satan's soul. Let me repeat that correctly. Darkness entered Judas' soul. And wherever Satan enters, darkness does abide. One pastor told me that Judas couldn't help himself. Judas was a pawn. He had no choice. Judas was a pawn in God's hands to be manipulated so that God could send His Son to the cross and redeem mankind. There's some merit in that thought. You may not agree with it. I'm not sure I do. Someone else came along and told me that Judas was a zealot for Israel. He was an insurrectionist, a rebel against Rome. There was a certain tribe of warriors who did everything they could to kill a Roman soldier, did everything they could to remove the ancient rule of the Romans and to restore Israel back to his former glory. And they said that really he was part of this gang of ambushers, ready to do anything. He was willing to sacrifice his friendship with Christ to force Christ's hand so that Christ would come back as a warrior king and lead Israel to greatness and banish the Romans from the land. At whatever power Satan entered his heart. You know, the disciples, even after Jesus rose from the grave, were still wondering when Jesus was going to take over and make his kingdom here on earth. Listen to them in Acts chapter 1. They said to the Master, the resurrected Master, "Will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Is now the time you're going to be king?" They did not realize, Judas did not realize, the disciples didn't realize, that God's kingdom was never to be a political kingdom, never to be a military kingdom, not a kingdom of strength and commanding people to obey, but that the kingdom of God was always going to be the individual transformed life in Christ. That's what Paul talks about in Romans chapter 6. Christ's kingdom is never based on politics, not based in forcing somebody to obey. God's kingdom is here, but not yet. God's kingdom exists in the transformed individual lives of us saints. Judas wanted to control our uncontrollable God. He wanted to say, this is the way that we should restore our glory. God, you can follow along. God, you can help me achieve this. We set our plans and ask God to join us. That's never the way. God says, this is my plan. You join me. Judas had a lust for power and a lust for preeminence. He wanted to be first. He had a plan. So let God carry it out. Ask yourself this question this day, like Judas. How do I betray my God? I want you to know that the empty tomb, I want you to know that the risen Christ is the basis for my faith. Doesn't matter what I do on my own. Everything I do is futile in the face of eternity. Every good deed that I do, every witness I make, every trust I place, if I do it in my own power, it's futile. My faith is based on the empty tomb of the risen Christ. It's the basis of my hope. You remember Isaac when he was carried up onto the mountain and he was near the point of death, the dagger hanging over him? And God rescued him back to new life, a new hope, didn't he? You remember Jonah when he, with disobedience, went into the belly of the fish? And God brought him back out of the belly of the fish to new life, new hope. Do you remember when Aaron held forth the rod and it burst into bloom and it promised new life, new hope, new walk with God? Remember the words of Christ, I will raise it up again. There's the miracle of Easter. Who else could raise their own body from the grave? The empty tomb and the risen Christ, the reason for my faith, for my hope, for my love. I will preach love to you, the saints, and you'll preach to me. I will witness love to all those people who are lost, and I will testify of my love to my holy God. A pastor once commented that in every congregation there are three common problems among the saints. you and I fit in one of these. We're either reclining, whining, or shining. You think about that. As a saint, you're either reclining, whining, or shining. I called you a saint. Wasn't that nice of me? I bet you'll invite me back again so I can call you saint again. You know what a saint is? Saint is somebody who is set aside by God to do special service. Somebody set aside by God to wear the towel in the basin. That's what a saint is. There was a little girl whose parents were very, very strict. They belonged to a religion that was full of rules and regulations. You do this, or you're not a Christian. You worship this way, or you're not a Christian. You behave this way, or you're not allowed in. They were very austere and severe and stern. They did not express the joy of the salvation of Christ. They did not express the joy of the freedom of being in Christ. One day her aunt invited her, come to my church in the city, magnificent cathedral. And she walked in and she was amazed at the size of the building. She was amazed at the beautiful polished woodwork. The big, the spire on the outside, the pipe organ. She was overwhelmed. And she sat down and she looked at the windows and she was amazed at the beautiful stained glass windows. And she whispered in a very low voice to her aunt, who are those people in the window? And the auntie replied, why dear, those are the saints. This time the girl didn't whisper. She yelled out, I know who the saints are. They're not the people who wear the frowns. They're not the people who wear the stark, dark, weird clothes. They're the people who let the light shine through. That's what you and I are. We're the people that let the light shine through. We're the people who carry the basin and the towel. We serve others that the glory of Christ might be made known abroad. God bless you as you carry a basin and a towel. Not only just at this holy season, but all times of the year. How brave are you today? Turn to hymn number 218.